Hey, welcome to PopNerd Talks, and in this new series, I'll be doing something a little different than my other videos. So instead of tutorials, which usually go over the technical aspects of the work, I want to talk more about the theory side of things. So in this video, I'll be giving a quick introduction to environment design and go over some things that you can do to improve your work. While a lot of the background in this video will be using Blender, most of the concepts in this video can be applied to most 3D software. Environment design is all about visual storytelling and about using context to show the viewer what your world is all about. Whether you're planning to create a sci-fi cityscape, a forest scene, or anything in between, there are design concepts that can be applied to your work to better tell the story of the environment you're creating. Starting with the basics, let's talk about focal points. They're essentially just the main subject or focus of the scene. A piece of art can have multiple focal points, but in general, the focal point is what your eyes will naturally be drawn to. And the key to creating these focal points is using contrast to separate the main subject from the rest of your work. You can create contrast to make the main subject stand out by using different colors, shapes, textures, scales, and many other aspects. For environments, the placement of the subject can also efficiently create a focal point. As you can see from this concept art from God of War, the artist creates contrast through the lighting to make a focal point. In this piece, the artist uses scale to create a focal point by making the creature larger than its surroundings. What makes these so important for environment renders is that you don't want the viewer to be overwhelmed or frustrated because their eyes don't have something to focus on. By including a focal point, you can increase the viewer's visual attention, and this happens due to saliency. In psychology, the salience bias is a cognitive bias which inclines people to focus on objects that stand out and are in contrast to their environments. This bias is a survival mechanism which helps with learning and attention, and this concept has been used in visual design to efficiently capture a viewer's attention and communicate the message of artwork. Now that we know what focal points are, why they work, and why they're important, let's move on to the next section of this video, which will further explore the fundamentals of art and how to apply these to environment design. When composing an environment piece, using what's known as the rule of thirds is helpful to increase the saliency of your artwork. You can split your canvas into 9 segments by using 2 horizontal and 2 vertical lines. This rule states that your main subject and other points of interest in your scene should be at locations where 2 of these lines intersect. If you look into professional photography and concept art communities, you'll see that the rule of thirds is well known and often used to make the composition seem more interesting. This rule works at increasing saliency because if the subject of your artwork is at the center of the canvas, the viewer's eyes will more likely fixate on just that center because it is equally distant from the edges of the canvas. However, if the subject is besides the center, the viewer's eyes will have to follow the subject, spending more time with the artwork. The rule of thirds is very helpful for composition, but it isn't really a rule as it's more of a suggestion. While useful, if you're looking to create a more symmetrical composition or make your subject more intimidating, breaking the rule of thirds is the way to go. Another method to improve the composition of your environment is keeping balance in your artwork. Having too much going on at just the bottom or corner of your canvas can give your work unnecessary visual weight. A lot of the time, changing the canvas size or repositioning objects can help keep balance, but I find that splitting an environment scene into a foreground, midground, and background makes it easier to organize everything. The foreground is usually at the bottom of a canvas and represents the part of the environment that is closest to the viewer. The background represents the part of the environment that is the furthest from the viewer, and the midground is everything in between. Having all 3 parts of your scene working in harmony is the key to creating a satisfying composition. Your focal point can be placed in any of these locations because the main purpose of dividing your scene into these 3 parts is to create depth and balance. You'll want each of these parts to have its own unique elements, such as distance, color, and contrast, to create variety in the scene, but you'll also want the transition between these parts to be smooth so the viewer's eyes can be guided through the different sections without any abrupt changes. Using leading lines in your composition can make it much easier to guide the viewers through the foreground to the background. Leading lines can be anything as long as they guide the viewer's eyes towards a certain direction or point of interest. In environment design, these lines can be horizontal, vertical, or diagonal, and some examples of these can be roads, rivers, trees, horizons, and basically anything that would make sense to consistently be in your scene. Leading lines can act as a bridge between your foreground and background. And using diagonal lines to do so can be effective at keeping the viewer's visual attention for a longer period of time while guiding them through the entire canvas. Curved lines, such as rivers and roads, can also be effective at increasing visual attention because the viewer will have to spend more time with that component. There are many ways of creating depth in a 3D workspace. Unlike 2D art, assuming that your objects are scaled appropriately, most of the perspective work is already done for you in 3D software once you find a good camera angle. However, there's still many ways to achieve depth. A pretty simple method to create depth in your environment is to have the same repeating elements get smaller as they get further from the camera. This also works because the repeating elements essentially do the same thing as leading lines, guiding the viewer's eyes, while providing perspective as well. Using volumetric elements to create haze or an atmosphere in your environment can also be very effective at creating depth in your scene. Atmospheric perspective is the effect that the atmosphere has on the contrast and saturation of objects as they're viewed from a distance. As the distance between a viewer and an object increases, the object will start to become brighter and less saturated, blending into the background. This occurs due to light scattering in the air, which can be recreated by using volumetric objects or depth passes in most 3D software. If your focal point is too unsaturated due to being far from the viewer, adding a light source that just shines on your focal point can regain some of the lost contrast and saturation. This can also help create a sense of mystery as the main subject of the scene is surrounded by darker elements. Depending on the lighting and composition of your scene, atmospheric perspective can help create the mood for your scene and make it more dramatic. While using atmospheric perspective and leading lines to guide the viewer's eyes can be very effective, tangents are common mistakes that can throw the viewer off. Tangents are two objects in a scene that are either touching or close to each other in a misleading manner. Tangents can be parallel objects, objects that are touching the edge of the frame, and object placements that create false depth. Applying these elements can help your scene look better if done with purpose, but accidentally incorporating these can lead to the viewer being confused. While getting started on environment design with 3D software, it's common for beginner artists to overfocus on the technical aspects of their render and forget the basic composition techniques that can take your piece from looking decent to looking like a finished product. Keeping these techniques in mind while working on an environment scene and mixing these compositional methods with the technical parts of 3D can be a very effective way to design satisfying environments. There are lots of other aspects of visual storytelling that can be utilized in environment design, such as lighting, camera angles, architecture, and more cues that can help with world building. I will be making a part 2 to this video which will go over everything I just mentioned, so make sure you're subscribed and have notifications turned on. Thank you for checking out this video, and I will see you guys next time. Oh, and before I end this video, I just want to say thank you to all my supporters for subscribing to my channel and helping me reach 5,000 subscribers. You guys are the best.